crossings with 1,600 residential units. And we also have the VTA student housing proposal just across the street from the project. This map shows that the future BART station and existing Caltrans station is within 5-minute walk of the project site. And the project is proposing to change the general plan to very high density residential, which is defined in general plan, and it is intended to take advantage of proximity to transit, offering an urban feel and also transit-oriented development. So as mentioned in the last meeting, the applicant has prepared a parking study looking at real-time data, and the conclusion was a parking demand ratio of 1:2.2 and 1.29 spaces per unit. Staff also, in addition to that, looked at Transform Green Tree parking research and study, and based on those, staff chose 4 sites from Green Tree study, which is more similar to 575 Benton in terms of the location near transit and also the number of units. So the first one on the left is located in San Jose near Metro and VTA bus, similar to our site. And the number of residential units is 323 with 557 parking spaces. Parking is provided as a ratio of 1.7, but only 0.89 spaces are used per unit, which means 49% of those spaces are not used currently. The one on the right is also located in San Jose with 218 units and 283 parking spaces. And the parking ratio provided is 1.3, but only 0.71 parking ratio is right now used in this project. Some other similar examples, the one on the left is located in Sunnyvale. The parking ratio provided is 1.6 and 1.2 spaces per unit are used right now. And in Mountain View on the left, there's a project similar to our site. The parking ratio provided is 1.34 and only 0.94 spaces per unit are used right now. And almost all of these 4 projects are about 4 to 5 stories near transit. This is just to look at the architecture of the site, of the proposed project quickly. The project is massed to form a collection of appropriately scaled buildings with different material to break down the massing along Benton and El Camino Real. The project applicant has been working with Old Quad residents and architect Rob Mayer for several months to come up with this design and architectural style, which is in historical, industrial, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And as you can see, the greatest density is located close to the transit station, which is along El Camino Real. And as mentioned before, staff is recommending to include retail at the corner of the Alameda and Benton Street. This is a slide just to go over the differences between the proposed and current project. So from the approved project was for 318 units. The project is proposing 355. The density was approved for 55 dwelling unit per air care, and the current project is proposing 61.7. The retail space was 22,000 square feet. The applicant is proposing approximately 20,000 square feet of retail with 2,000 square feet of commercial space within live work units. But in overall, as you can see, the image below shows the Mission Town Center proposal and how it is kind of, and so the current proposal is an improvement from this architecture that was proposed before. This project design provides an opportunity to be more compatible with the surrounding historical neighborhood, and also the breaking down of the massing is more appropriate as it gets closer to the single-family residential. And as mentioned in the last community meeting, community members requested permitiers to cooperate with the city for the option agreement for Franklin Street, and since then, the applicant has been working and volunteered to work with the city, and as you may know, last night, Council approved a staff recommendation to acknowledge the key elements of the option agreement and authorize staff to finalize negotiation for this deal. And by this, this is my presentation. We are available if you have any questions.
Thank you. Okay, questions? Right, no questions. Now, the applicant has already presented, so what is the applicant going to go through the entire presentation again, or?
I would recommend asking if any members of the public would like to make any public comments, and then the applicant has 5 minutes to rebut at the end.
Okay, all right. Actually, I do have a question. The staff report says that the previous, the approval that the council gave on 318 units, that's already expired in February 2018. Is that the city's position? The entitlement is already expired.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The entitlement that was given at the previous council meeting for 318 units, that expired in February 2018 is what the report said.
Yes, that is the city attorney's office's position that the DA has expired.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so would the members of the public like to speak on this project? Okay, well, we have a lot of people. Rob Mayer, and each of you have 2 minutes.
Hello, commissioners and staff. Thanks for hearing this project. I just want to give you a little insight into my involvement. I sat on where you're sitting for 4 years as a planning commission and architectural committee member, and I'm excited about this project. It's something that when I was in your position for 4 years, I was hoping that an actual project with some soul would come before me, and it didn't happen. And I think, one, I appreciate that Prometheus' willingness to work with us, as well as their architect Czech. I mean, it's not easy. I'm a resident here, I'm an architect here. To get involved, it's not an ego thing. Sometimes it is an ego thing, but at any rate, what I would say is the beauty of this design, and hopefully you can see this, between the previously proposed thing and the current project, is that the mission style, for one, is not a very good scalable form design for larger scale projects. That's my opinion, but I think I'm a decent architect. And that the building forms that you see here are just, there's a nice rhythm and an individuality with each thing, so they almost look like they were developed over time, okay? That's where the soul and the individuality, that's something that was ripped out of our city, and that's what my vision has always been. Put some buildings back that have building forms and styles that work with the scale, and start making a great energetic building, streetscape, everything, and then we start getting everything working in the favor of the downtown and everything. Housing is important because San Jose took them 30 years to realize they had to put housing in their downtown to make it viable, and that's why I'm for this project.
Thank you. Okay, Adam Thompson. And the next person is Mike Kotsai, so if you could be ready, and the Mark Roast, yeah.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Adam Thompson, President of the Old Quad Residents Association. I apologize for not being here last time. I had a previous engagement that I wasn't able to get out of. We've been working, I've been on this, working as Old Quad resident for 4 years, since the Irvine days. And this project and this developer has listened to the community needs against what we were looking for, which was, being architecturally aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood. Also, saving the two historically significant houses. They did do that. They also provided more community space, which is in the form of a 6,200 square foot park that will be open to the public, which is nice. Also, one of the issues that we really had was, in the downtown, or what was the downtown, we don't have a lot of great places to go. And Irvine's proposal had all of the retail outdoor space on the corner, the acute corner of Benton and El Camino. And that was never really a great option for us. I mean, who wants to sit on El Camino and eat dinner or, have a cup of coffee? And so they heard us and they moved it in on the Benton side, which really allows more of a quiet, peaceful experience for somebody. So if they actually want to go use that retail, it'll be a lot nicer. We need good projects in this city. I mean, I've been working on a lot of other stuff as Old Quad president and resident, and this is really the first time where I think the community, the developer, and even the city in this case has all come together to make a creative project that will really benefit the city for far longer than many others that have. So I appreciate your guys' consideration of the project, and I do support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael Tsai. And the next person will be Mark Roast, and then Sean McFeely.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Michael Tsai. I'm the founder of a grassroots organization called South Bay YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. We've been tracking this project, and I think it's an example of a step in the right direction. What I think is really positive about this is really its location near the Caltrain station. And I think this is one of the best locations where you do want to put in more housing. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, we don't want housing here or there. Well, then where? I say, put it next to the train station, because this is the best way to mitigate traffic and parking problems, because if you have housing where people can just walk to the train station, that encourages transit ridership. It reduces dependency on automobiles, it reduces traffic, and it reduces pollution. So I was looking at the proposed number of 355 units. I actually think there's room to go higher. Because, like I said, if you're not going to put the density here, I don't really see a better place to put it. I'm glad to see the affordable housing component coming in. Right now, I think we are facing a housing crisis that's certainly hurting a lot of our workforce. For example, teachers and school employees, their salaries have not gone up to keep pace with the high cost of living. So by increasing the supply of housing, really you're helping a lot of segments of society that could really use the help, and right now are enduring longer commutes. Right now in Milpitas, people definitely complain about a lot of pass-through traffic. And I suspect a lot of that is just people going to work in Santa Clara, but they can't afford to live in Santa Clara. So if you have more housing units in a location like this, I think it's not only going to be good for Santa Clara, but better for the region.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next person is Mark Roast, followed by Sean McFeely and Jonathan Evans.
Hi, Mark Roost, San Mateo. I'd like to third the more low-income near transit. 10% is not adequate. It may be what a rule is, but you should have 20 or 30 or 40% low and very low and extremely low income housing in that location. And recommend group rapid transit for arterials in addition to the existing bus service, and jitney service, which is flexible routes, and Uber and Lyft are just examples of that for last mile support. And you'd wind up having a lot more people spending a lot more money on other things instead of their cars. And it'd be beneficial for the community and be beneficial for parking issues and everything else. And we can do networks of the group rapid transit is very inexpensive, and we could do networks of them all along the arterials. There was a state rail plan that showed a big grid, and they were talking about using light rail for filling in those squares, for making up that grid. I'd say use group rapid transit instead, and it's been thoroughly engineered and thoroughly tested and even demonstrated on a quarter scale model basis back in 2000. So I'm available to talk more about that.
Thank you. Since you have 30 seconds, what is group rapid transit?
As opposed to personal rapid transit, which is 2 to 4 people typically, group rapid transit is typically like 30 people in a coach. So
Is it like chariot?
No, it's elevated, bidirectional, Futrix, monobeam group rapid transit. So this is an elevated system where the only interference with existing street surface uses is every 100 feet or so, or whatever it is, you've got a column that supports a beam.
Like a monorail?
Yeah, okay. Like monorail, only much lighter. We're talking about 10,000-pound vehicle that carries 30 people that's 30 feet long, as an example.
Thank you very much. Okay, next person is Sean McFeely, and then Jonathan Evans.
Hello, thank you guys for letting me be here. Again, my name is Sean McFeely. I'm a co-chair of the Advocacy Committee for Catalyze Silicon Valley. Our members have written a bunch of letters to you guys on this project, advocating for it. We wanted to, again, stress things that we like about it, especially the way that Prometheus has worked with the old quad in terms of the design and the historical elements in the area, and being appreciative of what is already there in the city. In light of the traffic study by Transform, we definitely really want to push for a parking ratio of at least only 1 parking space per unit. This is a transit area. The people will use the transit. This is one of the most dense transit spots in the city, the only opportunity for a transit-oriented development. It'll be the 3rd most connected station in the Bay Area. With all the transit lines, only Diridon and the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco would have a higher transit access. And we need to use that in order to get people off the roads. Another thing would be, this is a transit area. We really need to build housing. This is an opportunity to build housing without adding a lot of cars to the road. We would definitely support pushing for more housing at this location, especially more affordable housing. We really need to address the housing costs in this region. And then we would also support potentially adding more retail on this building at the ground floor, especially to help kind of create a destination for Santa Clara. This will be, it's not only a transit station for jobs, it's a transit connection to the airport and a gateway to Santa Clara. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Evans, and followed by Mary Grizzle. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jonathan Evans, and I'm a resident that lives relatively nearby, within about a mile of this project. I've been aware of the project since Irvine was working on it. Irvine, I don't think, did a very good job of engaging the community. After that project failed, Prometheus has done a really excellent job of reaching out to the community and changing the design so that it both fits into kind of the old quad neighborhood and also protecting scaling from the transit-oriented side down to the single-family residences that are, on the west side of this development. I do think we do need to provide good transit-oriented development for people. But I think this does it in a really good way that benefits the community and has a lot of space for everybody in the area to use. So thank you.
Thank you. Mary Grizzle. Followed by Emmy Moore, Minister.
Thank you for allowing me a little bit of time to speak today. My name is Mary Grizzle, and I'm here. I would like this project a little more time, and I'll tell you why I want the time. The option that was negotiated is very unclear. It was very hard to understand, and it's not all intact. It was the way it was put forth last night. I didn't understand it, and a lot of people are saying they didn't understand it. It was very unclear, the option was. And I'm against all the traffic that it's going to produce in the area. I live in the old quad. And another thing that is very troubling to me is Mr. Prometheus has not always been very forthright about his projects. Mr. Prometheus built Benton Apartments, and when he built those apartments, they were supposed to have retail at the bottom. He put up a stink about it, that he didn't want retail because there was a traffic impact. There was not enough traffic. Well, of course there's not going to be enough travel or cars because they blocked Franklin Street. They closed down Franklin Street, which was the main hub. So for him to say now that he's building this unit and he's going to put retail at the bottom, I don't trust him, to be honest with you. And I would like a clear-cut option where people like me can understand exactly what was said.
Can you clarify, what do you mean by, when you refer to options?
There was an option agreed upon last night for Franklin Street. And this is connected with Franklin Street somehow. I don't know how, but it is connected with Franklin Street. And
okay, thank you. So your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Grizzle. Well, before we go to the next person, what is the option we're talking about here?
So the Franklin Street option is really the opportunity to extend Franklin Street, which was closed off several years ago. And this is an opportunity that, because of the configuration of Franklin Street and ownership that exists, that Prometheus has on they're a multifamily residential project. The city is working with Prometheus in order to come to terms on an option agreement that would provide the city a right-of-way, an easement street right-of-way that would allow for connectivity for Franklin Street. There have been individuals, probably many who may be here, who have also advocated for a right-of-way of 75 feet. Yesterday at City Council, the council discussed the project, the option agreement, and gave direction of their support for varying different dimensions that would allow for easements to be between 58 feet to 48 feet at other points, as well as 34 feet at other points as well, in order to really minimize the fact that there's an existing multifamily building currently on Franklin Street, to work around that existing building, recognizing that a future time when that property redevelops, there will be an opportunity to ask for a dedication at that point in time. So that's where the council was yesterday. That is a project that's different than the project in front of you and is in front of the city council. However, the developer is the same, and obviously the developer's interest in participating is related to both of these projects.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I've heard a little bit about that option, but I was told that this project should be considered completely separately from the other option, because although it's the same developer, it's a different project, and that the two projects are not linked. So I would, if that is the case, then I would like to make that clear to all the commissioners who are going to be deliberating on this issue. Okay, thank you. All right, any more minister?
Good evening. It's nice to be back, and I'll keep it short. I was here at the last hearing, and I am curious to hear some of the questions from those commissioners that needed that additional information. Having chaired this commission and having helped found this association for the Old Quad, I'm still quite excited about this plan for a couple reasons. One, being an advocate of transit and a regular rider of the Capitol Corridor train, it is so wonderful to know that there are people who will be able to reside in close proximity. So this meets that part of the plan. Doing the homework. This plan is better than the last one we saw from the previous developer. And it's apparent that between the staff and the community, but the developer has met. There were so many meetings, you couldn't even fit them all on one sheet. I remember the days where we didn't see that type of outreach from developers. Prometheus has obviously done their homework. Anyway, I think it's compatible with our neighborhood, and I think this is going to be the beginning of an area that's going to orientate with that transit, with the density that we need. So for all those reasons, and a few more, I hope you approve it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Patricia Leong, followed by Rod Dunham.
Hello, my name is Patricia Leong. I am a resident of the Old Quad, and I walk past the site every day to the train. I also sit in the Historical Landmarks Commission, so I've seen this project since the Irvine days. As you imagine, like I'm always concerned about like how the project would fit characteristically into the neighborhood, and like back in the Irvine days, it was just completely wrong. And I really appreciate Prometheus actually working with the OQUAD group to doing a design that actually shifts the massing more towards the El Camino Real, so that, you know, like I don't actually care like how high it goes over there, but it actually gradually fits more into the neighborhood as it goes. So I'm actually pretty happy about like how this turns out. And you know, I've also looked at like some of the mitigation plans because it is actually very close to the third mission of Santa Clara, and they've done some very good job in trying to figure out like, you know, how to treat the historical resources in the area with the plans that's been put forth. So I hope you actually approve this project, and I just want to throw my hat in for support.
Thank you very much. Okay, Rod Dunham, followed by Marie Meyer.
Christian, hi, this is Rod Dunham, Reclaiming Our Downtown. I'm a fourth-generation Santa Claran. I have to say, and I did it last time I was here, and I rambled on, and I'm sorry about that. I'm a resident at 829 Benton, which is right down the street. And so, of course, I'm concerned with parking. I'm also concerned with, and to make certain that there's a percentage of retail that is included. Whereas going back to the Franklin project that we have been mentioning tonight, that parcel of land 50 years ago was turned over to urban renewal, and then in the 80s and 80s, it was bought out by Prometheus, and with 50,000 square feet of retail was promised to the community. It is now 100% apartments, okay, so that whole area is residential. I just want to make certain that this project, which is better than the Mission Town project that was proposed prior by Irvine, and I do appreciate the architecture and the old Quad Association, and I back them on that, but I am concerned, and I want to make absolutely 100% certain that the parking situation, along with Santa Clara University, there's 9,000 students right down the street. So you have parking, you have a situation where that is an, you know, that area of town, okay, has never been with that many residences before. Okay, so you have to look at all of those, and I'm sure that there's been a lot of work done prior to us being here tonight. I just want to make certain that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed as far as that area of town. As a resident, permit parking, okay, and we had mentioned about that, is very important to me, and so as well as my family.
Okay, so are you guys like working to implement permit parking?
Absolutely, and there's more we have to do, and I don't want to take any more time.
No, please go ahead.
You can have my 2 minutes.
No, please go ahead. I mean, we can ask questions and you can answer questions.
Founder of Reclaiming Our Downtown in the group, so there's a lot of folks interested about this project, okay, because it is a gateway into, Benton Street is now a thoroughfare. It used to be Franklin Street. Okay, from the train station all the way down.
Not about
this
the
is an
reclaiming,
area.
but the permit parking. Are you working on permit parking?
I am working on that, exactly. I mean, I've been with the police station. They've been working with, they've been doing traffic surveys on speed going down Benton. It's a thoroughfare. This is a thoroughfare into what will be eventually the downtown area. Okay, so I'm concerned as a citizen and a homeowner in the area to make absolute certain that everything is taken into consideration, that there's parking, that the retail is there. Again, we're talking about 9,000 students that have really across the street, you have a few little small in a shopping center, a little strip mall.
Yeah.
So we want to balance it out.
Sure.
We want to make sure that everything is
Okay.
done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yes, Mary Meyer. Oh, you're not speaking? Oh, Marie. You're Mary Meyer.
I am Marie Mayer.
Mayor.
That's fine. I'm a resident of Santa Clara, and I'm on the El Camino Real Advisory Committee. And I just wanted to say, I think Santa Clara is going to continue to have more housing. The current governor has signed bills to that extent, and the next governors are all arguing about how they can bring about more housing. So we're going to have it. It's a good place to have it. A couple people have hinted on it's near transit, and that's a good, it's a good place to have housing because then people can take that transit without adding more car trips. Also, Prometheus has done something I would like to see more of done in the city, especially on El Camino. Over on my part of El Camino, I live over closer to Bowers, there's a lot of beige boxes with red roofs. And what Prometheus instead has done is they've actually worked with the community to see what historically fits in that area, and it's a little bit different than a beige box, and it's exciting, and more importantly, like I said, they've actually worked with the community to arrive at that place. And if a developer is willing to do that, they should, as they're working with the community, by the time it gets here, it should be in a good place that should be approved. So I just wanted to say I also support this project, and I'll give up my last minute because it's getting late.
Well, thank you very much. All right, anyone else? Everybody spoke, who wanted to speak? Okay. Would applicant like to rebut, add further comments? You have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm John Moss with Prometheus Real Estate Group. I want to thank you for allowing us once again to come here and present our plans to you. I don't know if I want to rebut things that were stated, but I can certainly comment on some of them. And I'd like to go over a couple of the items. So a couple of things that were brought up, I noted while the speakers were there. One was the staff talked about the DA and the expiration. I don't want to go into that in a lot of detail, but the only one thing I do want to say, if there's any relevance to the commission as far as whether the current entitlements from Irvine are in place or not, we strongly believe that they are. So we agree to disagree with staff's conclusion that they are not in place. We were told by staff 2 years ago that they were in place, and then we found out a few weeks ago that staff had changed their minds and had determined that they were no longer valid. So we sent out letters to all of you and to staff today from our legal counsel that concludes, we think unequivocally, that those entitlements are in place. We have not heard back from the city at all other than that they disagree. So we can go into that more if we want to. Retail, there were comments made about what happened in 1985 or 1990. I can't comment on that. I wasn't with the firm back then. I'm not aware of any of those issues. I'm not to say that they didn't occur. I'd be very much surprised if they did, because the city of Santa Clara is normally very strong about reviewing what is built relative to what is on the plans that were submitted and approved. I can assure you, and you don't need to take my word for it, the 22,000 square feet we have proposed will be built, and my understanding is we will not get certificates of occupancy to go into that building if they're not. So the city has complete control over that issue. On the retail, there was some comments about potentially having more retail. We're very concerned about that. And we stated that 2 years ago when we were in due diligence to get involved in taking control of the property to the city. And we had made it clear that we were reluctantly willing to do 22,000 because Irvine did it, and we still have 22,000 between the live work and the retail. But expanding that, we're very uncomfortable with doing so, partially because it was a plan that was agreed to a couple of years ago when we sat down with the city, and we just heard a couple of weeks ago again that one was something that the city may want to revisit. So we think 22,000 square feet of retail is a significant amount of retail. All the retail experts to date have told us that they're very concerned whether that will be successful or not. We certainly hope it will be, and we're expecting a lot of cafes out there, possibly brew pubs, restaurants, and we're excited about that, but we would like to be able to limit it to what Irvine was approved for, and probably more importantly, what we were told, at least by staff a couple of years ago, for that item. Outreach to the community, as mentioned earlier in the slide, we agree with 11 meetings we had with the old quad, and as a result, a lot of changes were made to our design and to the project as far as architectural, but also we changed the massing and a number of other items. I had some slides, and there was one particular one. If we could show it, I just wanted to take 1 second to go through that. In the meantime, there was mention about the Franklin Street option agreement. I know that it's not linked to this project. If there's any desire for us to go over that or for me to talk about it tonight, it happened last night with council. It was unanimous approval by the council for what we're talking about doing that. More than happy to do that. And then lastly, parking has been a big issue, and I'd like to take a second to go through that if I can. So let's see if I can slide this over. Whoa, it's going really fast. Okay, so this was the slide I wanted to show. So this was a plan that was approved in effect by for Irvine on the left-hand side, and then ours on the right-hand side. So in terms of changes, we've provided, you know, the number of units that Irvine wanted was 470 units, and then they got down to 370 and finally 318 units. When we started this project, we concluded the same way that Irvine did, that 318 units was not feasible to go forward. So we sat down with the old quad and proposed 400 units with the state density bonus, which we understand that we were entitled to be able to employ. The old quad felt strongly that they didn't want 400 units, even if it provided more affordable housing. So we ended up compromising down to 355 units, and that's how we ended up with that particular number. The heights and the massing, the heights around the perimeter, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, are almost identical to what the Irvine project was. And so we put the additional 37 units in the interior of the project. But as you can see, we've changed the openings to the project and the massing. So if you go around, I don't have the ability to be able to show it from here. I don't think there's a mouse here either, but nevertheless, you can see that there's almost a fortress condition with the Irvine plan. There aren't any breaks in those buildings. They wrap around. There you go. And then we've created a public park with a huge break. We've gone ahead and relocated historic homes on the site as well, which creates less massing. And then we opened up the building on El Camino, which there was not an opening before. And then we've got a large public plaza and retail. The other thing that we did is we have 15,000 square feet of open space for the public on this property. The Irvine project had 6,000, so we're over 230% more open space on our project than what the Irvine project had. So we do feel like that, on top of the architectural changes that were very significant, and Rob Mayer did a great job working with our architect over here to come up with changes. The old quad really didn't like the design, the architectural feel of the Irvine project, so we changed it radically, and we did so with many, many, many meetings of getting the input from the old quad, which we felt was critical. The only other item I wanted to mention, I thought staff did an awesome job. I hadn't seen those slides before on the parking, and I hadn't seen those results of the parking studies that they had done. This is interesting, historic shots of the old downtown back a little while back. So this was 5 properties that were studied by an independent consultant for properties we own in Santa Clara. The yellow line is the key, which is showing the demand per unit, 1.22 to 1.29 parking stalls per unit. Our project, I think, is around 1.5 right now. So we're significantly above the actual demand for 5 or 6 of our most recent projects. And one of them is an older one, Mansion Grove. These are real projects, real statistics. It's not theoretical analysis. It's based on demand in the last 6 to 9 months on properties. So it's very consistent with the other projects that were shown by staff. And then we went ahead and studied a few months ago another 5 projects that we have in Sunnyvale and Mountain View nearby, all brand new projects for the most part, and all have a demand of 1.25, you can see down to 1.03, again, and 0.78. Consistent with what staff showed earlier for other projects that they dug up as well in Santa Clara County. We feel very comfortable with the parking. If we didn't, I can assure you we would increase the parking, because if we do not provide adequate parking for our residents, they will move out to our competitors' projects and we will lose money. So we have a significant incentive to not undercut parking. As much as it's costly to build, it's a lot more costly to us to lose tenants or have to drop rental rates in order to keep them there. So we take it very seriously. We've got over 13,000 units that we own and manage, and we study parking on a monthly basis. So we're very well versed in it, and I know that there's a lot of discussion on parking, whether it's adequate, but I think the facts speak for themselves on these 10 properties, along with the 3 or 4 that staff showed earlier tonight. So any questions? More than happy to be able to answer them, and our architect is here to go over any of the design issues that anybody may have or questions that they have. So,
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Chahal.
I have a question for staff or city attorney.
Oh, should we close the public hearing first?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. All right, any motion to close public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye. But we have more questions for you, Mr. Moss, so, all right.
So we have a development agreement which is being referenced here. And I need to have some more details about the street vacation, Sherman and which is the Fremont, 2 streets which are being vacated. What does the agreement terms state about those 2 streets?
Street vacation?
Yep.
I don't know off the top of my head about what the DA says about the street vacations. I don't know if
Do you want to know the status, or do you want to know what is?
No, status is, I know those streets are city streets right now, but I need to find out what is city getting out of it when we are vacating those 2 streets for this development. What are we getting out of it? What value are we getting? Like recently we had a street Franklin vacation at the SCU, and I know it came back and went to the market value. And
I think Mr. Moss can respond, but there isn't actually any monetary cost that the city is getting from the developer. What happens is, because there are existing utilities that have to be retrofitted, their investment in the right-of-way is multiple millions of dollars, and that's essentially the city's compensation is getting upgraded utilities, but he can further explain.
I can try to explain to the best of my ability. So the process was that the city hired an appraiser to figure out what the value of that land was. We, as the developer, hired a separate appraiser to figure out what we thought the value of the land was. The city's appraiser came up with a value that was quite a bit less than the appraiser that we had hired to do it. The agreed upon value was the city's appraiser's value. And in doing the appraisal process, which is consistent with what the appraisers are required to do by their licensing, if there are utilities in place, and there are utilities and they have to be relocated, the cost of that relocation is a deduct to the value that they come up with for the land if there were no utilities. So in this particular case, there's over $6 million that we will spend in relocating the utilities that exist in those city streets. And as a result, the dollars paid to the city are close to zero. I don't know if we recall the exact amount, but the value of the land was around $6 million, but the utility relocation cost was $6 million. So the appraiser hired by the city as an independent appraiser concluded very clearly that, in his opinion, the value of the property was what it was, which was $6 million less whatever the costs are to either environmentally clean up the site, or in this particular case, to relocate utilities to allow somebody to redevelop the property.
Okay.
And Commissioner Chahal, sorry if I may. The DA says that the vacation of both of the streets would follow our city charter process. So under Section 714 of our city charter, the city council has the power to sell or convey any property of the city. but first they have to notice that in a newspaper, and people who want to bid on the land can. And so there would be some sort of bidding process based on the fair market value of the land. And then if there's a bid that's at least 5% higher than, let's say, Prometheus gives, then there would be some sort of bidding process. That's what the DA has set forth, and that's what it says in our charter. So that the exact amount hasn't been determined yet of how much we would get for vacationing these streets.
So the council has not approved this land transfer yet, right? I mean, or agreed on the
DA
final
says
price.
that the city will approve it. It's just the matter of how much
And that
Prometheus
has
will
not
have
been,
to pay.
that's not a done deal yet,
Right.
the price.
Right.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
So that raises another question, like how can we have a development agreement when we are not clear about these things? Because development agreement is the base document which we are signing with the developer, and nobody knows right now what we are getting or what we are getting into. So
The issue is the charter. The DA can't trump the charter. We have to follow the provisions that we have under our city charter. And the city charter doesn't say exactly how much the land's going to cost. It's going to be a process to get that amount determined.
But
does the charter say anything about who's going to pay for the utility, working on the utility?
No, it
does
doesn't.
not.
No.
So it's up to the council to decide on that as well.
As
What to agree to.
If I may, as part of the DA, it says that developers shall relocate or cause to be relocated all public utilities existing on the vacated street areas of the project. So in the DA, it is noted that the developer shall pay all the costs for relocation of the utilities.
The developer pays for the relocation. Okay, thank you.
So that raises, because this development agreement was approved in February 2016. Previous one, I'm talking about the Irvine one. So we didn't do anything since February 2016 to find out what the street value would be in 2 years? Nobody worked on that, like, okay, this is the value of the street and this is the actual city will get it. Like, I'm struggling with, we signed a development agreement, we passed 2 years, and we still do not know what the street value is or what the city will be getting out of if we give that street to
Because
someone.
Irvine didn't go forward with the project, so after city council, it all stopped.
So Irvine didn't take it, but if they took it, then we should have found out by now.
Yeah,
That's my question.
They didn't move forward.
At what stage do we really find out, okay, this is the concrete value of the vacation of the street?
If I may, there has been appraisals that have been put together by the city through their appraiser in the last several months, and it has come up with valuations. I think there's still an option if somebody on the courthouse steps, if you will, or otherwise wants to pay more than that, they're entitled to do so. But those values are all stated in documents that the city has right now. So short of somebody else paying more, which between you and me, I mean, somebody pay more for property that you can't develop unless you're owning all the other properties around it like we do. I'd be shocked if somebody's going to all of a sudden pay more than what we're paying, but it's a possibility.
Okay, I'll come back with some other questions
Okay,
later.
thank you. All right, Commissioner Salem.
You know, I had this conversation with the developer on Friday. You've commented that we shouldn't consider the two projects to be linked. Unfortunately, the conversation linked them, and it was repeatedly linked by the developer. So I don't think it's going to be a fair request that we stop thinking about one while we think about this one. So, you know, I don't know what conversations others had, but unfortunately they are linked. And I think that has to be considered in our conversations. That's all.
Would the staff like to address that issue?
Sure. The decision about the option agreement isn't one that's going to be coming forward to the Planning Commission. That's the option is for the city to, at some point in the future, be able to acquire certain property on the Prometheus, the current Prometheus development. That is not linked to this project. This is just the approval of this project in itself, and it's not linked to the option
Not
agreement
linked
that's
in the decision, it's linked in the consideration. Statements made by the developer about this project versus the other project have influenced my thinking, and therefore it is applicable to think of them together, whether or not we are voting on them. We're not voting on both of them, I understand that, but I'm not going to be able to put out of my head conversations that included both. You understand? Hopefully that's clear. Okay, that's all.
When you say the two projects are linked, there were many parties who who have interest in this project. So which party told you that the two projects were linked? Was it the Old Quad Association? Was it Prometheus?
Mr. Moss declared that one project's viability depends upon the other project's approval.
Okay.
So when you make that statement, you've linked the two projects.
I see. So that's different from what I heard from Mr. Moss when I met with him this afternoon. He told me that it was not linked. Those two projects were not linked, that one is not dependent on the other. I assume that's what he meant. So maybe he can clarify that for us.
Very clearly. So I'm sorry for the confusion. In our opinion, with our firm, the projects are linked. As far as the city is concerned, with their decision-making after many discussions with the city manager's office, city attorney's office, and planning staff, the city is not linking these two decisions. So our interest in going ahead and providing the land that we own for the Franklin Street, we don't really have interest in going ahead and parting with that property unless this project ultimately gets approved. With all that said, that linkage, not even linkage plan, that Franklin Street plan went to council last night and there was a unanimous approval for it. So it sort of becomes moot to some degree, but.
So let's take for an example, this project is denied. Then suddenly the Franklin Street project becomes untenable and it is withdrawn?
Yes.
That's where the link happens. And that's why consideration needs to be made.
Again, it's a link from us, not from the city. I don't think the city's linking these two projects together.
Okay, so let me ask another question to the staff. Let's say that if one of the commissioner wants to see the Franklin Street option go through, would it be proper for that commissioner to make that a consideration in making a decision on this Benton project? Although, I mean, you cannot guess what happens in someone's mind, but is that a proper thing to do?
It's the city's position that they're two separate projects, two separate decisions. So in a perfect world, yes, I would, we would request that wouldn't be a consideration, but I can't, there's only so much that we can control. And obviously there is some sort of, in the bigger picture, there is a link. But like I said, our position is that they're two separate decisions and that the Planning Commission's decision tonight is only with 575 Benton and should not have anything to do with the separate option agreement that's happening over at Franklin.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we clarified it as much as possible. All right, Commissioner Chahal. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Commissioner Kelly.
The applicant kind of clarified the point that everybody was asking about, but I did have a little bit of follow-up questions to staff about comparable projects. Now, you brought up earlier that comparable projects close to transit are around 4 to 5 stories, and the massing for this one is comparable to other projects like the one in Mount View, correct?
So the projects that I showed in my presentation, they were ranging from 4 to 5 stories. That's right. And this project has 5 to 6 stories along El Camino Real, but the height is 73. The maximum height along the perimeter is 73, which is the same as Irvine's project.
Okay. So more importantly, it's comparable to what other cities are doing close to their transit center.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Chahal?
Okay. So I'll just recap, like the Irvine project at the density of 315 was approved and was okay with it. But now we have 355, and there are several considerations. We had a VTA presentation, and we saw that there's a funding available, and most of the BART phase 2 will be there. So, and SCU students can be over there. So I'm okay with that, but what I'm right now struggling is the ethical and moral issue of these two things being considered side by side. I was amazed when staff also included that in the staff report. So that moral and ethical, like if we have a DA, if we have to make this thing black and white clear, the city can sign any development agreement, they can link any project with anything. But this does not seem to me as a transparent method of doing it. So I really feel whether I'm for the project or against the project, I really feel disturbed about how this project is being handled right now. And linkage of two, as Mr. Salem mentioned, that linkage of two projects. And without that real transparent method, I am struggling to make any decision on this one. And especially when we have a development agreement, if there is no development agreement, I can understand. We have to go according to the plans, whatever the plans are. Development agreement, we can do anything what we want. Why aren't we making it very transparent? Okay, this is what we want. This is what we want on Franklin, and let's put it black and white, and I'm okay with it. But at this stage, with the facts coming, grapevine coming, or other stuff, I will be abstaining from making any decision on this project.
Commissioner Shahal, maybe I can just ask a way of looking at this request to see if it would make you feel more comfortable, which is if you look at just this project, and Franklin Street was not on the table at all, what is it about this project that you like or you do not like? That's what our question is for you. What is it about this project in and of itself that you would like, and what gives you pause? And as a commissioner, would you recommend this project in and of itself with all the information?
Wait. You said you had issues with two things being linked. When you say two things, what things are you referring to?
The vacation of Franklin Mall Street and this project.
You're talking about the other the option we were talking about.
That's correct.
And this.
That's correct.
Not what you were talking about earlier about how much is Prometheus going to pay
that's
for
what that was my other question. Like when we are vacating a street, I don't even know, like we are approving a development agreement.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah, but we are not even, we do not even know what we are getting into, basically.
Okay, so would you like to answer the staff's question?
So to answer your question, we had a project which was 315 dwelling units with the Irvine project. I'm not sure what changed since then that we are going to 355. For me, the traffic has gone up. Other factors have gone bad to worse. Affordability housing has gone bad to worse. We are still taking 10% of that. And those are the concerns for that. But if I look at the other aspect of it, I can make a decision. But this part of this thing, like how I'm dealing with intermingling of two projects, and which is something going on in the community, and which is being mentioned by another commissioner over here, that it was very specifically mentioned. And it is mentioned by Mr. Moss over here, that yeah, they are linked. So if they are linked, the city should be forthright to talk to them as a development agreement. If you want this, if there is no development agreement, no problem. Why aren't we putting that thing on black and white? Okay, this is the development agreement. Let's finalize whatever linkage is there. Let's clear it off so that it's transparent to each and every resident how we are making a decision on that. And I do like 355. I do like that. Some of the factors, like it's close to SCU and BART phase 2. I was in 2016. the measure was not passed for the BART funding. Now I'm much more clear about it. I'm favorable to about that, but I'm struggling with still the ethical part of it. That's why I'll be abstaining on this one. Each resident has to have a clarity of how we are making decision, especially when we have a development agreement on that. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Would you like to respond?
Attempt to try to clarify maybe a little bit more on this linkage thing. The reason it's linked for our company is if the city is going ahead and requiring us to provide and give land that is separate lands to the city that we don't want to give to them to get this.
You're not being asked to give that land. You're going to be compensated for that strip of land, I understand.
Right, but we're not required to sell land to anyone. So if we were required to provide and sell land on another property in order to get this project approved, we wouldn't do that. We have gone ahead and voluntarily agreed in a very transparent way, because there was over 100 people here last night for several hours going through it with the council as far as what that project was. As far as the city not linking it, the real reason they're not linking it is because it's illegal to link those two issues. So that's why the city has taken the position they can't link it. I'm linking it because if the city's going ahead and trying to take property from us from another one for this project, I'm not going to allow that unless we're comfortable with it. So this is not a non-transparent transaction.
So why not
and the city council was 100% so in favor of the project, and we're fine with it.
So what I'm saying, why don't we put in a development agreement? If you are linking it, propose that to the city. Okay, this is my development agreement. I want this clause to be put in a development agreement.
It will be linked.
It's not illegal. Development agreements are never legal if we negotiate those.
We will approve, and we will approve the document that was agreed to last night with council for what they want on Franklin Street. And we will go forward with this project if it gets approved as proposed. So it's not linked, but we are willing to do both, and we're doing that on a voluntary basis on Franklin Street. There's absolutely no requirement whatsoever for us to give, sell, or do anything with our property on Franklin Street, but we're doing that in a voluntary manner, in a cooperative, collaborative, transparent manner. Last night, there were several hours with several hundred people on TV for all of the community to see, and the discussion on the subject was ad nauseum. So there's nothing behind closed doors. There's nothing that's in a non-transparent way. There's many people in the audience here tonight that were there last night. I wasn't the only one. It's an above-board thing, and we're volunteering to do it, and we're doing that to help out the connections to the downtown. So I'm not clear in terms of why there's so much
I think we could just make this very simple. It's just that it's really there's two different things going on. There's a development project, and then there's this option agreement. He's just specifying this, and it's out there because it's a consideration because they have a pending project. It's really just something they're moving forward with this because they have a pending project, and it's really just a cooperative arrangement, essentially, is that they know they have a project going forward. They want to cooperate with the city because the city has an interest in this right of way. And it's really just as a matter of fact that these things are happening at the same time.
And it's voluntary, and it's also a council action. So that the Franklin Street option agreement and that whole issue my understanding is it doesn't come to commission. So as was stated by staff, I think tonight's meeting is really about the merits of this project, independent of what's going on with Franklin Street, to the best of my ability, my knowledge.
Right. And just to add, when you said what is the difference between the Irvine project and this one, and why was it 318? The reason why Irvine walked away from it because it was financially untenable. So therefore, because the council is the one that imposed the unit count and reduced it, the analysis under the EIR was for 385 units. By imposing, a number that felt more comfortable to them, it made the project financially unfeasible. So therefore, we have a new developer coming forward. They found the ratio that would work for them to make it a reasonably profitable project is 355. And that's why you're seeing a different project today.
Yeah, and clarifying the financial infeasibility, the Irvine company is one of the largest, most successful, well-capitalized companies in the United States. The CEO is, I think, in the top 300 or 400. richest people in the nation. I don't recall him ever dropping a deal before. He dropped this deal because it started at 480 units, and by the time they were done with the affordable housing and the cut in units, the thing didn't make any financial sense, and it didn't make any financial sense for us either. That's why we sat down with the old quad and proposed 400 units using the state density bonus law, which we still feel like we're entitled to go ahead and do and to propose to the city should you not be interested in this project. But we came up with the 355 as a compromise with the old quad, who didn't want the 400 units and added affordable housing, instead would prefer the 355, and that's how we came up to this. But the 318 was just not financially feasible, and that's why we've come up with the plan. With that said, it's the city's prerogative, of course, to approve
I would be
anything.
rather happy with 400 with affordable units.
Well, we reached out to your community at great length, and everybody's got a different opinion on it, but that particular group preferred 355. So I appreciate your comment, because we would have preferred 400 as well, but you know, everything is a compromise, and we did spend 2 years working extremely closely with that group, and you heard from some of their members tonight.
So, since we're bringing this all out, if this project does not get approved, is the Franklin deal going to be dead too?
If this deal does not get approved, we don't really have a lot of interest in going ahead and providing our property on another site.
So your plan is, I mean, so what you're saying is, the way you like to see, the way you like, your strategy is to get both approved, go ahead with both, or neither will go through.
Yeah, well, our strategy, to be honest with you, on Franklin Street, it didn't come up until about 9 months ago or so. So that was never part of the mix when we went ahead and committed to the acquisition or the long-term lease with Mr. Visa over here, which we have formally signed and we are committed to for the next 85 years. So we did all that prior to that issue coming to the fore. Since then it came up, and we voluntarily cooperated with the city and with the old quad to come up with a plan with Franklin Street, which evidently the city council is thrilled with. We had a 4-0 vote last night. I mean, it was a pretty amazing meeting. So this was really a positive, everybody. This was not a negative. I think all parties came together, and if you look at the tape, it was a pretty incredible meeting, and there was a lot of positivity to it. And what I'm hearing tonight, unfortunately, is a lot of negativity about something that I thought was very successfully done over the course of a year and a half, working closely with the city manager's office, the city attorney, the Old Quad Neighborhood Association, and last night with the council. So I'm hoping this is a big plus. We came out of that meeting feeling very, very good about it.
I would try and recommend that the Planning Commission, I'm sorry to cut you off. Because I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the Franklin Street and established that it is a separate application. It's actually being heard by the City Council, not the Planning Commission. And there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of residents who've come out, who've talked about the architecture, who've talked about the density, who've talked about the transit-oriented nature of the project. And I think there's a lot of information about the project and whether or not the Planning Commission feels comfortable with the project in and of itself, you know, Franklin Street aside. And I would appreciate, given the late nature of where we are all at with the hearing and this being the second hearing on the project, if we could advance the conversation beyond the Franklin Street discussion.
Yeah, and the only reason that it was included as part of the presentation, because at the community meeting that we had, community asked for it. So as a planner, as a staff, I have to told you that what community is interested in. So that's why it was included as part of the presentation. Because at the community meeting, community members were asking for this.
Okay, any other comments on, questions on the other topic? Okay.
I'll take a motion.
Commissioner Kelly, oh, yes, you're making a motion.
All right, so let's start with addendum 1. I'd like to recommend to the City Council approve addendum 1 to the Mission Town Center final environmental impact report for the residential mixed-use project located at 575 Benton Street.
Any seconds?
I guess I have to second it, and I'm going to have comments for it.
Okay, we have a second. Discussions.
Okay. I think my major objection was not to the project. I find the project in scope. I find it very useful to the community to have that kind of density. I simply dislike the approach taken to try and push the project by using another project as almost a hostage to the outcome of this one. So I respect Commissioner Jane's response to that as well. I'd like to see this project proceed, but I'd like to see less of those kind of things in the future when they bring decisions to the commission to affect both areas and then try and play each one separately. That's all.
Okay, anyone else? Any other comments? Okay, well, let's take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Okay, four.
Aye.
You support the project. Okay, so it's 4-1, motion carries. All right, do we have a second?
I'll get to the second item. Let's see here. Okay, next thing. I'd like to make a motion for the City Council to approve the general plan amendment from Santa Clara Station High Density Residential to Santa Clara Station Very High Density Residential on a 5.7 acre site for the property located at 575 Benton Street in Santa Clara.
Any seconds? I second. Okay, discussions? Questions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, abstain. Okay, motion carries.
All right, next one is, okay, I'd like to make a motion recommending to the Santa Clara City Council approve a rezoning from light industrial ML, single family R1 6L duplex, R2 7L, and thoroughfare commercial CT to planned development PD of the property located at 575 Santa Clara Street in Santa Clara.
Any seconds? Okay, I second. Any questions, discussions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, one abstained. Motion carries. All right.
Okay, down
roll.
to, I'll make a motion that we recommend to the City Council that they adopt an ordinance to approve the development agreement between the City of Santa Clara and Benton and El Camino LP for the property located at 575 Benton Street in Santa Clara.
Okay, any seconds?
Second it.
Okay, any discussions? Okay, so is there any way we can resolve this pricing issue on that street that we're handing over? It's not our purview. So, okay, so we're gonna leave it up to the council to address that issue. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's,
I know we have one more. I know.
oh, I understand. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay.
All right, I'd like to make.
Any abstain? Yep. Okay, so four votes, motion carries again.
Okay, and the final motion, I'd like to motion to the City of Santa Clara Council to determine that a proposed vacation of the Fremont Street east of the Alameda and a portion of Sherman Street north of Benton Street would be in conformance with the 2010-2035 general plan.
Any seconds? Okay, second. Okay, any questions, discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, okay, Commissioner Cha abstains, motion carries. All right, so we're done with
I'd
this
just like to make a clarifying comment. All of the resolutions have the May 23rd date on it, so they should be updated to include tonight's date. Thanks.
That's it. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next item. Item 18-700. Action on appeal of Architectural Review Committee approval of a mitigated MND and data center project located at 2305 Mission College Boulevard.
I know I was leaning over. Sorry, I'll lean. Thank you.
That's why I recuse myself. They're linked.
Missed all the fun.
I didn't miss any of the fun. I was there.
Well, I missed it in the.
Okay, who's going to tell us about this one?
Thank you. Chair Casey, members of the commission, this evening we have an appeal about a 480. Just 1 second. I wonder if it ran out of power. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so there is an appeal filed, actually 2 appeals filed for an architectural review approval. And the 2 actions taken by the architectural committee was the adoption of a mitigated negative declaration and the corresponding project, and it's nearly a 500,000 square foot data center located on a 15.7 acre project site. There's an existing use on the property, about 358,000 square feet of office. The proposal for the data center complies with our general plan, which is currently a low-intensity office R&D. Zoning is light industrial. It's a permitted use in the industrial area. And the project site is located on the north side of Mission College Boulevard and east of San Tomas Aquino Creek. So here's just some elevations. This was the project that was reviewed by the architectural committee. So it did have a very contemporary design. It would be brand new architecture, complete demolition of the existing building. And this shows the configuration of the site plan. So in addition to the data center, there will be an equipment yard. There'll be a substation that powers this property. And then there's a generator yard for backup power. And this is the existing site. Just 1 second. And this one shows the south elevation. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Okay. All right, and then here is the north elevation. Not sure what's it's buzzing, but it's, I don't know if there's a power situation or. Thank you. So after the meeting, and actually during the meeting, there was both information presented by both sides of the 2 appellants, At the time, they were just public members of the public who provided written comments to the city, and they were responded to in the environmental document, and our environmental consulting firm is here to respond to those. Then following the decision by the Architectural Committee, they filed an appeal stating basically the same issues related to the environmental document and various issues related to approval, the city's approval authority. And so the appeal is primarily focusing on the adequacy of the initial study mitigated negative declaration. I'm not sure why. Is there another? Okay. So you see the two law firms that filed responses in regards to the action by the Architectural Committee. They were filed within the required period, and the primary concerns involve air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and the requirement for the California Energy Commission's determination action prior to the city's granting an entitlement permit for this property. So let's see here. Next slide, please. So the M&D was prepared, and there was a notice of availability circulated in accordance with CEQA. The M&D concluded that the proposed project with the incorporation of the mitigation measures will not have a significant effect on the environment. Again, the 4 organizations that responded to the environmental document included the 2 appellants, plus the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority and the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Those responses were made, and a supplemental memo was prepared to address the comments, and they were reviewed and approved by the city attorney's office. The 2 comments that were made by the outside agencies were that one was for a bus stop shelter along the northern frontage. It was a recommendation, and then the water district really just had some technical facts that they wanted the length of some water course. So those were responded to. The considerations for you, the approval of the data center would secure the purpose and intent of the zoning code and the general plan. The data center is a project that is permitted in the light industrial zoning district. The summary of responses to comments finds that there are no changes and conclusions to the MND after weighing all the facts and information presented by the appellants. And as stated in the MND, all impacts associated with the proposed project are less than significant after mitigation. Therefore, there's no requirement for the preparation of an EIR, and there's no additional mitigation measures required because everything is mitigated to a level of less than significant. And for that reason, we are recommending that you deny the appeal and uphold the Architectural Review Committee's adoption of the MND and the Mitigation Monitoring or Reporting Program, and also deny the appeal and uphold the architectural approvals action approving the data center at 2305 Mission College Boulevard. And with that, I'll conclude. Answer any questions you have.
Okay, Commissioner Kelly?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's from before.
Oh, all right. Any questions? No questions. Okay, would the what appellant? Would the appellant like to tell us about your appeal?
I'll be happy to start. We did submit some comments yesterday. Good evening. My name is Mike Lozo. I'm with the law firm Lozo Jury, and I'm here on behalf of LaUna Local 270. And before I start, we'll incorporate all of the comments that we already submitted previously, but tonight I'll focus on 2 issues basically that we emphasized in the letter that we sent in yesterday. We still believe the evidence that you have indicates that there is a fair argument that there'll be a substantial impact from the project on air quality and pollution, particularly NOx, nitrogen oxides. And when you have 2 experts submitting comments, whether it's the project or commenters in a mitigated negative deck context, then a fair argument exists that there might be an impact. And that's what's occurred here. We've had our consultant review the data and rerun the modeling that was done for the air quality, and in their opinion, the air pollution amounts for particular NOx go above the thresholds that were set by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The project applicant and the EIR preparer came up with a number that's just slightly under the significance threshold. So it's close no matter which way you go, which underscores the fact that we have a fair argument here. First, the first issue is construction emissions. So just during the construction phases, phase. Our consultant reviewed all of the air modeling for that in light of a construction phasing schedule that was provided to us. The details were provided to us, I think, just prior to the architectural design hearing, and they took those numbers rather than whatever was in the model in the MND and reran the model using those updated numbers. What they noted was the phasing schedule that was provided to us just prior to the design committee showed that the length of the phasing amounted to about 61 days more than what was plugged into the model originally. And then they reran the model to account for that extra time. And again, the consultant for the project already had indicated that it was just shy of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District numbers for NOx. The limit that they said is 54. The project calculates it's going to come in at 51 pounds per day on average of NOx from their construction using the older numbers. Rerunning it with the numbers provided to us at the architectural design, it came out to 57 pounds per day, 3 pounds over rather than 3 pounds under. That's a fair argument that there's a significant impact from the air quality emissions from construction alone at the project. So the ISMND is improper, we think, as a matter of law because it lacks substantial evidence, actually, because it relies on a modeling effort that used numbers that weren't the numbers that we think were more accurate that were provided at the design review. And secondly, a fair argument exists because we presented evidence from our consultant rerunning the model showing that it comes in slightly above the significance threshold. That's just the construction piece. On the operation side, it's also a similar scenario, we believe. There also may be significant air quality impact from NOx during operations. Again, the existing mitigated negative deck and the initial study project that it's going to emit quite a bit of NOx just under the threshold set by the BAA QMD. And the comment that we made yesterday, and I think it reiterates some of the comments that were made by several of the commenters before, is that in Santa Clara you happen to have 37 or more data centers at this point because of the price of electricity from your municipal electrical system. The data centers like to come here because it's a little less expensive, apparently. I'm not an expert on this. And if you take 37 data centers, all of which come in maybe slightly below your threshold of significance, but when you add them all up, we think there's a fair argument of a cumulative impact from 37 data centers, both emitting from their generators when they do their regular testing, whatever those schedules might be, from whatever relatively small number of vehicles that would be coming to the site, but also the power that they're using from your local gas-fired plants that you own and operate. There's an incremental increase from their need for electricity that about, as I understand it, probably 70% of which comes from the gas-fired plants for the commercial uses in town. The residential uses, I think, have more of a green mix. So those we think those add up to a fair argument of a cumulative impact. That nothing in the MND discusses the 37 other data centers that already are in place. 2 are on the table right now, this one and one other one that's before the city. Nothing discusses how much extra NOx will be coming out of those gas-fired plants from operating all of those data centers. So that's an omission in the MND, which we think is an error of law, and there's no substantial evidence to support a cumulative, whether there's a cumulative impact of NOx emissions from all of those related projects. They're all here in Santa Clara. They're all going through the same few gas-powered plants when they draw their electricity, and they're all operating their generators here in the local community. And we don't know if there's regional impacts or not from that, and they're all presumably like this one, just slightly below individually the air quality management district's significance thresholds. But when you add them all together, the whole purpose of the cumulative impact analysis is where, although each project in itself may not have its own individual impact, when you add up 37 data centers plus 2, so 39, including the 2 proposed ones, you may have a significant air impact. And that's a fair argument that you may have that impact. So we think for that reason, the evidence still requires that an EIR be prepared rather than an MND in order to proceed with the project. And so we would ask that you grant our appeal and vacate the decision of the Architectural Design Committee. And unless you have questions, that's all I had to say tonight.
Thank you. Okay, any member of the public, any questions to the appellant? Okay, none. Would members of the public like to speak? Oh. Do they get total of 10 minutes? Oh, okay.
Total of 10 minutes? Oh. No, for each okay. All right.
Obligation.
No, I was going to say. Thanks. And we also submitted some hard copies as well.
I think we did
So good evening. My name is Colin McCarthy. I'm an attorney at Adams, Broadwell, Joseph, and Cardozo. And I'm here tonight on behalf of California Unions for Reliable Energy. We previously submitted written comments on the MND here and attended the Architectural Review Committee. And so we will also incorporate all those, the comments previously submitted to this point. But tonight I would like to focus on a few key issues. The first of which was mentioned on the city's slide, and which is that the city, as a power plant project, the California Energy Commission actually has exclusive jurisdiction to site power plants exceeding 50 megawatts. That means that unless and until the Energy Commission makes a determination on the project, the other 8 public agencies, like local governments, do not have the authority to approve those projects at the time. So in our letter that we submitted today, there are attachments which are public records we received from the California Energy Commission's Office of Siting Manager, which is correspondence between that office and the applicant in this case, showing, basically confirming our statements that the California Energy Commission does have the exclusive jurisdiction, is the lead agency, and that specifically no generators could be installed, operated, or tested until that approval is granted, or until that approval is granted. This is consistent with what the Energy Commission has done in other Santa Clara data center projects. I know the McLaren data center project is currently undergoing a small power plant exemption proceeding, which is for power plants that are less than 100 megawatts can actually get exempt from the Energy Commission's licensing process and then get obtain local approvals. So that is the first reason that the city should grant this appeal and not approve the project here. But second, on the environmental impacts of the project, so we submitted a number of written comments on the MND, which were prepared with the assistance of a technical expert, Dr. Phyllis Fox. and her comments provide substantial evidence in support of a fair argument that the project will have substantial or significant air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas impacts. So the city did prepare a response to comments, but those responses did not address all of the, did not adequately respond to our comments. So the first, the MND fails to disclose and mitigate potentially significant noise impacts that would result from simultaneous operation of all 120 of the project's backup generators. The analysis of the noise levels that would occur from all 120 generators operating simultaneously is not actually included in the initial study or MND for this document. On the same kind of issue, our comments provide substantial evidence that simultaneous operation of the project backup, 120 backup generators, would result in a potentially significant NOx impact. In essence, the city's response to these comments was that simultaneous operation of the generators would only take place during an unforeseen emergency power outage, and that the project has not experienced a power outage during the last year. This response is inconsistent with CEQA's mandates. Under CEQA, if there's substantial evidence that a project may, keyword being may, have a significant effect on the environment, the lead agency must prepare an EIR. May means that it is reasonable probability that the impact may occur. So while it may be the case that this particular project site has not experienced a power outage in the last year, in our comments, we attached a link to the SVP webpage showing that there's been over 40 power outages in Santa Clara in the last year. And this does not mean that it's not a reasonable possibility that a power outage would occur. That's actually why these facilities need the backup power supply. For the same reason, power outages, yes, so power outages happen, and the project, our comments provide substantial evidence that simultaneous operation of these generators will result in potentially significant noise and air quality impacts. As was mentioned before, CEQA in the MND context sets a really low bar for when an EIR is required, and that's whenever there's substantial evidence, such as an expert opinion like we included in our comments, that supports a fair argument that the project may have significant impacts, then an MND is required, even if different evidence may allow the different conclusion. So then the final issue we discussed at length in our comments is the issue of the project's greenhouse gas emissions. In this area, the city conducted a consistency analysis with the city's climate action plan to conclude that the project's impacts would be less than significant. In our comments, we explained that the determination that the project would have less than significant impacts because it is consistent with the climate action plan is not supported by substantial evidence, because the city's climate action plan was prepared to achieve the city's 2020 GHG reduction targets. This project it's unclear from the documents exactly when the project will begin operations, but at any rate, it'll be at some point shortly before 2020. I think the city's response was that the project is expected to begin operations at some point before January 1st, 2021, and therefore is subject to AB 32 requirements and the city's cap. I think by that same logic, it's also subject to SB 32 and the more stringent reduction targets we have as a state have adopted. This project will continue to have GHG emissions well beyond 2020. It's going to probably operate for a number of years, and to rely on the project's consistency with that 2020 target to say, or consistency with measures in the climate action plan to say it'll achieve a 2020 target does not provide substantial evidence that the project will have a less than significant impact beyond that point. And as we also discussed in our letter, there's the measures in the climate action plan, such as water conservation measures and transportation plans, do not really respond to the type of GHG emissions that are going to be created here, which will result from the project's substantial energy demand. And then because of the inappropriate, the fact that consistency with the cap, a 2020 cap in this situation, climate action plan, sorry, is does not provide substantial evidence beyond that point. We had our expert apply a different threshold to assess whether the project would have significant greenhouse gas impacts, and her analysis did conclude that the project's GHG emissions would be significant. So I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those points. I know I kind of raced through a lot of issues there.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, Commissioner Jane.
Yeah, you're talking about the GHG emissions in the 2020 cap, but the whole of California's electric grid is getting greener and greener every day per all of the new, you know, AB 32, SB 32, we might get SB 100, you know, it doesn't really make sense that they're not going to be tracking the greening of the grid.
It is, I mean, so there was no analysis on that point other than to say that the project will receive its electricity supply from Santa Clara, from SVP, who has a makeup of renewable sources and will be required to comply with certain state targets. But that does not provide the analysis needed to say that the sources of electricity that are provided for this project are from green sources, or just the level of analysis that this individual projects. I know that in other data centers, for example, with the McLaren MND, that analysis was set to say that was provided based on the makeup of kind of the emissions factor moving forward, what the emissions will be for the project, and that level of analysis was never provided here.
Okay, and I believe I saw this in architectural review. The generators are going on the roof now, is that correct? Was that true? No? That was a different project.
That's,
okay, that
yeah,
must be a different project I was looking at.
I would defer to the applicants on that, but it's my understanding it's
That's a different project, yeah, I'm getting them all. We have too many data centers.
Yeah.
37? Yeah. Okay. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Salam.
Yeah, was this project reviewed with the possibility of supplemental green energy, the rooftop photovoltaic or battery backup and distributed power, and all the other alternatives that could be used to reduce the amount of fossil fuel generator required power? Was any of that done, or is this just assumed that this entire project was going to draw directly from Silicon Valley Power and no other source?
It is from Silicon Valley Power because there has to be a consistent power source.
Yeah,
and
I
so,
understand,
so
but that's what battery backup and supplemental green gives you, is a consistent battery backed up power source. This isn't like new science. This is stuff that's been around for a few years, well, relatively new. I'm just wondering, is like all of the analysis was done with a single source of power from Silicon Valley Power with their generation capability and their mechanism. Was the project or the applicant allowed the option of having alternate green energy supplementing his requirements, which would bring the overall numbers down below the limits?
Yes, we'll defer to the applicant to respond to that.
Thank you.
But yes, but they enter into agreements with Silicon Valley Power for the purchase of the energy, and they can increase the amount of green power. That is a voluntary agreement, so that's available.
Because they don't seem to have a lot of distance to go to get below the threshold of an acceptable amount. So a little effort on the applicant's side would gain them the entire acceptance
I
of the
definitely
project.
would hear from the applicant, and they can provide more
Carrie
information.
Casey, just as a matter of process, the applicant should have also 10 minutes to
Yes.
provide their case.
Oh, yeah, sure, right. Oh, okay. Any more questions? Commissioner Chahal? And we have, it's 11:30, and we have a request from a member of the commission to take a vote on whether to continue this meeting because the meeting has run past 11:30. So do we have a motion?
I move that we extend the time of this meeting.
Extend the time of this meeting, okay?
Second that.
Okay, discussions, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? I guess we're gonna soldier on, afraid.
So I have a question for the staff. Like one of the things mentioned was the city lacks the permitting authority over California Energy Commission. How true is that?
Well, that is true. I'm sorry, not that the city lacks the authority, but it's just that the process, we don't agree with their conclusion. The California Energy Commission will go through a process to issue an exemption, but that's for the power plant. But we're not approving a power plant. We're only approving the architectural design and the M&D that talks about the generation. The applicant will be going through the Energy Commission to get that exemption, and I did have the conversation with the CEC reps and discussed it. They said they don't care whether you file it in advance or after you guys approve the project. They'll process it either way. And we did talk about a legislative fix to this issue because they said they are fine offsetting this to the local authority. And they will use our environmental document for their exemption.
Okay.
So we've already done, I've done one other one besides this, and then we had another one that another person worked on. So this is it's a routine, fairly routine. It does take a little while, but it is just a process we have to go through. And it will take place, we had anticipated it taking place after this decision.
Okay. My other question is, point was raised that we have 120 plus generators, and from noise point of view, from pollution point of view, they mentioned if all of them go at the same time. So what's the criteria of something like this? Like we can always say, oh, if the traffic is always at the same time, every
yeah,
road is
I'll
jammed.
defer to whether or not that's a threshold. It has to be analyzed in CEQA. I'll defer that to our environmental consultants because those 1% scenarios generally are not considered under CEQA, but I'll defer to them. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Would
Thank
the applicant like to rebut? So
It's not a rebuttal. They'll have a presentation.
Oh,
First,
presentation, okay.
the applicant.
10 minutes, right? Okay.
There were two appeals, so I think it's only fair I get 20 minutes, right? So,
All right.
and not to be outdone, I have my own letter. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Zachary Baltz, and I'm with the SSL law firm. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. There are basically three categories of issues I want to talk with you about. The first is the standard of review. We've heard a lot of talk about the fair argument standard. I want to talk about that. Second is about significance thresholds. And the third is about the Energy Commission's jurisdiction. Now, we've heard a lot about how the standard when you're considering a mitigated negative declaration is that if there's a fair argument, you need to do an EIR. But that's not quite correct. There needs to be substantial evidence that supports a fair argument that there's a significant impact. Now, the appellants have said, hey, we have our expert. Our expert says there's a significant impact. Even if you disagree, because we have an expert, that's substantial evidence. Boom, you got to do an EIR. But that's not correct. And there's case law on this. An expert opinion that is based on errors and omissions is not substantial evidence. It's not entitled to any deference. It can be ignored entirely. And if you look at the staff report that the staff put together and the responses to comments, which are really quite thorough, you'll see how time and again the expert opinions are based on errors and omissions. Now, Leuna submitted supplemental comments, and they included a supplemental expert opinion to address what they claim was new information that indicated that there were significant air impacts that were much more substantial than originally evaluated. But it doesn't take much effort to look into their analysis, and you'll see that what they were assuming is that the project was being constructed on more days than is actually the case. In fact, by their calculations, the project would be constructed on holidays and Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's Day and so on. And that's how they calculated more days, and that's how they calculated more admissions. That's their substantial evidence, but it's based on an error. It doesn't count. Let's see.
If you can address the commissioner's questions during your presentation, we'll appreciate it.
Sure.
Sure.
Now, one of the other issues, and these issues relate, is the significance threshold, the applicable significance threshold that the city applies for determining whether a potential impact is significant. And what we've heard really from the appellants is, hey, if we apply this particular threshold, we think that there's a significant impact. But the statute is clear, and the case law is clear, that the city has its own discretion, its own authority to establish its own significance thresholds. So just because the appellants don't like the significance thresholds that you've adopted, or that the city has used, the city is entitled to use those, and they apply. So, for example, there's been criticisms about whether cumulative impacts were evaluated properly. Well, the city in the staff report explains that for purposes of evaluating air impacts, they looked at the air districts, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's guidelines and their significance thresholds for how to evaluate air quality impacts. And in the air district's guidance document, it states explicitly that in developing project level significance thresholds, they take into account cumulative impacts. So very clearly, through that particular methodology, cumulative impacts are evaluated. They would have you run a cumulative impact analysis in a different manner. But the city is entitled to use the significance thresholds that it selects. It's using the air district's thresholds, which are entirely reasonable, and in accordance with those significance thresholds, it doesn't cross the line. There was a question about there's a power outage and all the generators had to run. Normally, when evaluating emissions, you don't evaluating potential impacts. You don't evaluate it on the basis of catastrophic events. You look at how a project is normally expected to operate. Again, that relates to the lead agencies, in this case, the city's discretion on the significance threshold that it selects. And so that's a relatively standard and a common scenario. In fact, I think you heard the appellants for cure, counsel for cure, I'm sorry, say that when their expert applied their own significance threshold, they found that there was a significant impact, which seems to really clearly articulate that they're applying their own standards, their own thresholds. But again, the city gets to apply its thresholds. With regard to the Energy Commission jurisdiction, staff, I think, said it very clearly. It's true that the Energy Commission has jurisdiction over a power plant, but the Energy Commission does not have jurisdiction over a data center. And so what is typically the case, what we've seen, is that a proposed project such as a data center will be evaluated by the land use authority first through its own CEQA process. And then after that land use determination is made, that this is an appropriate use, then there's an application to the Energy Commission for a small power plant exemption. Counsel for Cure made reference to the McLaren project. That McLaren project was evaluated by the city and was approved with an MND, much as this was, and then it was an application to the Energy Commission was submitted for the small power plant exemption. The process that's being followed here is exactly the process that's been followed in the past. There's some technical points that were made about how to calculate emissions and so on. I'm not the right person to go through that. We have a consultant here who can talk through that at length, but I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
The questions were, you know, it's in the Silicon Valley, the data center is going to rely on Silicon Valley power, which relies more and more on renewable energy. So
Well,
how does that factor into what the appellant is,
Well,
issue that appellant is raising? And you were talking about the worst case scenario. Yeah, how does that, yeah, I mean, traffic,
Right, well, for the
emission.
worst case scenario, I was making the point about it's not typical to evaluate the catastrophic condition. And so I think that responds to that. With regard to Silicon Valley Power, there are some discussions that we can have about the back and forth about that. But what I would say is that air quality emissions were calculated in accordance with the approved methodologies. And on the basis of that, the air impacts were evaluated and assessed and determined not to cross the significance threshold. So whatever the case may be with Silicon Valley, regardless, applying those standard methodologies for evaluating air quality impacts, a determination was made that they were not significant.
My name's John Watts. I was involved during the design process for this project, and alternate sources of energy was discussed in length. Due to the size of the project and the sheer volume of power required, there's space requirements, and they looked at different things like possibly solar, battery backup. There is battery backup, by the way. There's UPS battery backup that carries the data center for a certain amount of time before the generators are needed. So there were discussions with Silicon Valley Power that we would require significant renewable sources. The ESA with them would require significant renewable sources of power to be purchased for the project.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Motion to close public hearing?
I had a
Oh, yeah, yeah, there is. Okay, 5 minutes per person or 5 minutes total?
5 minutes per appellant.
Okay, great. All right.
We continue our time then?
Oh, yeah, you still have 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Yes.
Sure. I'll just speak quickly as the owner's representative, just to give some history on the project for those who weren't at the Architectural Review Committee. But basically, we bought this asset as an office building in 2014. We own several properties in Santa Clara. We enjoy a great relationship with the city, with the several properties we own here. But when the tenant vacated, instead of sort of steamrolling what we wanted to do with the project, we came proactively to the city and discussed what they would like to see here with their general plan. And that resulted in basically the discussions saying this is zoned by right as M1 light industrial to be a data center. We think that would be a great use here. It would actually lower the impacts to the site. And we'd like to see you proceed with that. And basically over the last 18 months, it's been a collaborative partnership with the city, many meetings to sort of design and redesign the project so that it's in the best interest of the city and with all these elements in mind as we designed it. So just wanted to give you the history of how we got here today. So we think we've completed the process and we appreciate the support throughout the process.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
We've all been here so long, I think we all want to have our chance. My name is Diane Hanna. I'm an attorney with SSL Law Firm, also here on behalf of the applicant. I just wanted to address one of your questions regarding kind of what do you do in an environmental context when you have things that could potentially happen, but there's not any real certainty about how or when or the frequency of it. And I think that's in the context of, we saw that in the comments raised with regard to noise, or the operations of the generators. Our team here can kind of talk about the plan for that. We can also talk about the high energy efficiency associated with this project. But from a CEQA perspective, one of the things that you do not need to do is speculate as to kind of unknown events. And I heard a really nice analogy from the environmental consultant on this. When you're conducting a traffic study, you don't conduct a traffic study that takes a look at, well, what will happen if there's a big accident across Highway 101? That's the situation we're in here with respect to the operation of those generators in the event of a significant power outage. Those power outages have not occurred at this site or in this area for over a year. So to run an analysis that assumes that those generators are going to be operating completely, all of them, at the same time from a noise and air quality or other impact would be purely speculative. And CEQA does not require that. So I wanted to give the city that assurance that the analysis was proper in its scope and that you don't have to run an analysis for kind of the infinite number of options and events that could possibly happen. Otherwise, you would never have a mitigated neg deck. It just wouldn't exist. So with that, if you have any other questions for the applicant and its team, you can see we've got a big host of people here. We're happy to answer any questions that we can. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, appellant, first appellant, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to respond to whether our consultants have provided substantial evidence of a fair argument, if you just look at the report that was filed along with our letter, it was calculating, they were only calculating work days. I asked the same question myself. So that the numbers that they calculated were based on days when the actually the construction would be happening. So there is substantial argument, there is a substantial evidence of a fair argument that construction phase of the project will exceed the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's standards. And in terms of whether or not the thresholds take into account automatically cumulative impacts, I don't think the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's thresholds actually anticipated 37, now 39 potentially, data centers in one city that has its own municipal power utility, and all running basically through one main plant over by the airport, where I'm told, though it's not in the MND, you cannot tell what the power mix is. But I guess generally, the commercial power in the city from that Silicon Valley power is about 70% through the gas-fired power plant, which means there's NOx emitting from there. So 39 plants, 39 data centers will be sucking power that's emitting a certain amount of NOx to the air. And then when you add in the other operational NOx that are acknowledged, which are just shy of the Air Quality Management District numbers, there's a fair argument that there's a cumulative impact in that scenario. There's just no way the Air Quality Management District's generic threshold standards for the entire region took that scenario into account. Our experts have made that comment. It's substantial evidence of a fair argument. So with that, unless you have any further questions, that would be my quick reply. I appreciate the late hour
Thank you.
as well.
All right. Second appellant.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to respond to 2 points that were raised. The first being the issue of it would
Are
be
you setting the time?
Purely speculation to consider the impacts of operating all these generators simultaneously. First of all, under CEQA, there's a number of areas where we do consider the reasonably foreseeable upset analysis. In fact, I was just looking back at the initial study here, and for the issue of hazardous materials, for example, this standard CEQA guideline checklist, Appendix G in the CEQA guidelines, considers whether there's a potential for a significant impact from a reasonably foreseeable upset condition, such as the spill of hazardous materials. CEQA also has us consider projects built in flood areas, earthquake zones, just to name a few. The case law on the issue of speculation is whether there's a way you can actually calculate what those impacts would be. And actually, I remember a comment at the Architectural Committee hearing here that from the consultants that it would be relatively easy for them to determine the impacts of operating, for example, with the issue of noise, operating all the generators simultaneously. And then on the issue of the Energy Commission, you know, I think the point is that you cannot separate this project as a power plant and as a data center. They're one and the same. The data center doesn't exist, to my understanding, doesn't exist without the backup generators. It's always been described as necessary to ensure an uninterruptible power supply to this facility. And so that raises issues of piecemealing review, and if you review the Warren-Alquist Act, the state law that establishes jurisdiction on these issues, it's clearly envisioned because the Energy Commission has its own environmental review process. And the order that this process is supposed to occur is that the Energy Commission will make a determination following an application whether the project qualifies for an exemption, needs a license, or is not does not qualify for the license in its form. And then once the Energy Commission completes its environmental review process, if an exemption is granted, then it goes to the local approvals, and that the local government is then to rely on, able to rely on the Energy Commission's environmental analysis. That structure clearly contemplates that the approval process is to go through the Energy Commission first, who has the expertise to address these types of projects, and then to go down to the local government approval. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, motion to close public hearing?
Second.
Oh,
So moved.
the applicant is going to rebut? Oh. Oh, you're good. Okay. Anybody else who wants to speak? Okay, motion to close public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, discussions. Okay, Commissioner Jane. Commissioner Jane.
First, I think that the argument about hazardous waste spills is not applicable here, simply because when you have a hazardous waste spill, the consequences are extreme, and that you want to make sure that you do account for that condition. Whereas in the case of, every car is emitting NOx, every car is emitting CO2, I don't see it in the same category as hazardous waste. I did have some questions for the applicant, though, which I'm going to ask now. I believe one of the people from the applicant side said that they had been in extensive negotiations with Silicon Valley Power about buying green power, and there was no conclusion to that. I'm saying, what did you finally negotiate with Silicon Valley Power in that respect? And then, I may have asked this in the Architectural Review Committee, but what is the PUE of this facility?
As far as Silicon Valley Power, the negotiations with Silicon Valley Power got to the negotiation of the ESA stage, and then when Prudential stepped in and took the lead of the project, those stopped until we got the MND, and then we would start those negotiations again. So they didn't go any further than negotiating the ESA, but nothing was signed. As far as the PUE, my compatriot here can tell you that the PUE was 1.09?
That's correct. Commissioner Jane, the PUE is 1.09, and I think we discussed what that means.
There was another project that had a PUE of 1.
The other one was 1.4.
1.4,
okay.
And I was like surprised, so.
Yeah, if anything under 1.2 is excellent.
Yeah,
anything under 1.1
exactly.
is extraordinary.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Salem.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify one thing. When I made my comments about alternative power, I was using my words specifically. I don't mean alternative, I said supplemental. All you need is 10% of your power to come from something other than Silicon Valley Power to fall down below your threshold. Not 100%, 10%. So start thinking about ways to bring the numbers down, and the objections are moot. The other thing is, I grew up in LA in the 60s. I don't like going outside where you have to chew your air. It's just crazy. I don't want to see this community air quality diminish because we have unrestrained development of high-powered facilities that require us to ruin our air to make them work. But at the same time, we're developing a community and growing a community where every few months we're growing it by the amount of requirements that this one plant would, or this one data center would generate. So are we going to stop growing our community, or are we going to try and just get better at managing our air quality? And I think everybody can contribute a little bit to that. So it's late, but I'm sorry to ramble, but that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else? Any motion?
If staff could clarify this, so when it's an appeal, it's a motion to deny the appeal? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yes, you're denying the appeal and upholding the Architectural Review Committee's adoption. Well, there's going to be two motions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to deny the appeal and uphold the Architectural Review Committee's adoption of the mitigated negative declaration and mitigated monitoring or reporting program.
Second. Yeah, in discussions, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, none. Motion carries. Next one.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the appeal and uphold the Architectural Review Committee's approval of the data center project located at 2305 Mission College Boulevard, subject to conditions.
Second.
Okay, any questions, discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yuki.
This action is final unless there's an appeal to the city council within 7 days.
All right, next item. Announcements and other items, and let's see. Planning Commission sponsorship of a community placemaker speaker series. Is anyone speaking? Oh, okay.
So, staff actually would like to bring this back. We had intended to have some opportunities to talk about some community placemaking speakers that are going to likely be timed very well, and really the interest of the Planning Commission to do some study sessions. I'd specifically talking to Commissioner Jane about the interest to bring some speakers to the Planning Commission. I know you're all interested in that, but the opportunity to leverage that also and draw people from the community in. People often don't like coming to Planning Commission hearings unless there's a project. However, instead inviting the community to come to a speaker series in which the Planning Commission sponsors, maybe provides through your budget some food, and we can put that on the sort of publicity materials that the Planning Commission sponsoring this, and we would use notification. But I think the speakers we would propose, we're not ready yet to give you that list of speakers. So maybe you'd let me provide you a little more information at the next Planning Commission about the specific speakers that the city has kind of been thinking about, and see if you guys would be interested in doing
Are you also going to come in, bring like your proposed budget too? Like estimated cost?
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you. So this is a great time to talk about like the training, because we have new commissioners, and we have the California Planning Association training seminar or conference coming up in September. Okay,
it's
so
October,
this is we're going to have a new budget cycle starting in July. We're going to have money, and this CPA is a great conference. So please look into attending. Okay.
And where was this again? It was what,
I don't know
San
where
Diego?
it is, but if you Google
San
CPA,
Francisco.
you'll know. Oh no, that's
great.
APA. APA San Francisco.
okay.
CPA is, I don't know where.
I'm finding it out right
Get my
now.
passport.
Okay, all right.
San,
Okay, so
San
board
Diego,
or committee
for 2018.
assignments.
Oh, okay.
Okay, board or committee assignments. So, okay, so this is the end of the fiscal year, and Commissioner Jay and I have been serving on the architectural committee, but I would like to ask if anybody else would like to volunteer for next year. And do we need to?
Commissioners.
Right, do we need to? Do we need to put this on the agenda?
I was an
It
alternate,
has
I
to
wouldn't
be on the
mind being
agenda to
official.
nominate your, well,
Okay.
you normally do your officers and then also committee assignments.
Okay, all right, and then I've been honored to serve as the chair, but my term is ending, so I'd like to add agenda for the next meeting to nominate and select new officers and new committee, architecture committee members. Okay.
And I will not be at the next planning commission meeting.
You want to be nominated, right, for chair?
Yeah, we'll vote you in
If
when
you're
you're not
interested
here.
in,
I would happy to entertain a nomination for chair.
for chair, okay, great. Thank you for volunteering. Okay, Commissioner travel training reports?
Yes. The Planning Commission approved $350 for me to attend the Innovation Impact Symposium, which was sponsored by Prospect Silicon Valley. The first speech was by Mayor Liccardo of San Jose, and he reminded us that San Jose is, the innovation hub, and two things that were invented there were the fruit cocktail and the Eggo waffles. So, okay. He was very concerned about the issues of having cyber threats in the city. Russian bots, use of customer data, autonomous vehicles, the collisions from cars, and so on. And what he said was that, failing is more quickly recognized in the public sector than in the private sector. So if something happens in the public sector where someone's damaged or there's some damage, it gets a lot of news, whereas in a private company, if something doesn't work or it doesn't get awareness by the public.
Stock goes down.
And so, not sometimes. Sometimes you have a chip comes back, it doesn't work, nobody hears about it until they get the next chip out. So he believes cities must embrace risk, confront and understand and manage risk better than we do now. They issued a RFI for how to use autonomous vehicles, and they have a Chief Technology Officer, Shireen Santoshan, and that may be someone we might want to bring in to one of our speaker series. They have an open API for real-time traffic signal data, and they had 31 responses to their RFI on that. The next speaker was Alec Stefan. He's sort of a futurist, and he talked mostly about climate change and impacts. One of the things he talked about is that there's no modeling software for climate modeling that models hurricanes above the 60th parallel, and we've now seen hurricanes above the 60th parallel. So that's a new normal, okay? There's a global housing shortage. We actually globally need to build 100,000 homes per day to keep up, okay? And they all need to have associated infrastructure, roads and parks and all of that. And then, so an interesting thing that he brought up is that there is a Chinese company, it's called the Broad Sustainable Corporation, Broad Sustainable Building Corporation. They built a 220-floor building in Changsha, China in 90 days. 220, and it is resistant to a magnitude 9. It's resistant to a magnitude 9 earthquake, okay? You can look it up. They built it's called the J57 project, a 57-story mixed-use building built in 20 days. So you look it up. There's a whole Wikipedia on it. It's called a broad sustainable building, okay? So, and then the next panel I went to was what makes a city smart? And they talked about Intel says that their mobile eye, sort of self-driving or auto advising software is in 24 million cars today. And they said that if you give 1.5 seconds of early warning on collisions, early warning to the driver, you could reduce collisions by 90%. In Barcelona, Intel has installed collision avoidance systems in buses and had a dramatic reduction in collisions. The next session I went to was connected vehicles. It says that Caltrans owns 10% of all the roads in California, and Caltrans controls 6,000 traffic signals. There is one of the things that Caltrans estimates that highways can carry 2,000 cars per lane per hour. And if you had connected adaptive cruise control where all the cars talk to each other, you could double that and get 4,000 cars per hour. So earlier we heard about the BART project, and they said that they have 66,000 riders per day. And so if you actually work that out with 2,000 cars per lane per hour, if you ran it continuously, 24 hours a day, full speed on these, that the Caltrans is equivalent to adding 1.5 lanes of highway traffic. And if you just counted for 12 hours, that would be adding 3 lanes. So that's how much traffic they're offloading from the highways at the maximum capacity of a highway. Then they said that this other company based in Dublin, Ireland, have this intelligent signal software that controls the signals based on the amount of traffic, so people aren't sitting at the light waiting for no cross traffic. And they said that they could increase the flow by 10%. So that's all I had.
Okay, thank you very much. Council action, upcoming agenda?
We have a few use permits coming up. One is 3200 of the Alameda, and that's the Hut. It's being converted to a full-service restaurant and not just a bar. Council actions, on the May 29th meeting, the deck was approved. That's 3402 El Camino Real, the 66-unit apartment building with the commercial frontage, so it's a mixed use. And then there was action, which you didn't see this, but it was 1411 Lewis and 1444 Madison. It was consideration by council based on our new historic preservation ordinance, whether or not a building was considered historically significant and would be eligible for listing on the inventory for purposes of CEQA, essentially. So it was found to be not significant. So you'll see a 3-unit project in the old quad coming forward later on that will not include any additional environmental review on that structure. And council also last night approved actually it's 2 days ago now, it's the downtown precise plan. It is the 14th on my phone now. The downtown precise plan, there was funding approved for that. And then they did continue 575 Benton, and because of the delay with the Planning Commission, and 1075 Pomeroy will be on the 26th of June.
Okay, thank you.
I was at the meeting, and I was kind of disappointed that we had taken the Morse Mansion out of the CIP, and it wasn't presented by staff.
I think there was, what happened is we just have like a memo that goes with it to say that there was the resolution. I think it
was not presented to council, and so they had no discussion about the Morse Mansion.
Well, all the stuff usually follows the document, and it's embedded with that information. I don't know that they you know, that it's.
I understand that our comments are embedded, but it's, unless it's in a presentation that Planning Commission suggested this, no one ever sees it. So that is my recommendation, that when Planning Commission makes a specific recommendation, that it goes on a presentation to council.
Yeah, for that matter, in all the issues that you raised were not included in the minutes either, so our minutes on that day's discussion.
Which minutes?
Our minutes for the planning commission.
We just talked about that. They don't put deliberations in anymore.
Well, yeah, I understand, but so there's no, the issue raised weren't covered anywhere is what I'm trying to say.
But we voted on that. So because it was a voted item, then it should have been in a presentation to council.
Okay, all right.
One other announcement related to city council. So we reached out to you all about a joint study session on Tasman East on June 26th, a joint study session with City Council and Planning Commission. We only had 4 planning commissioners say that they were available to attend that. So we actually will do 2 different study sessions, one for City Council and one for Planning Commission. So because of noticing or whatnot, we will keep June 26th for City Council and find another opportunity to come back to the Planning Commission for a separate study session for you all.
That's for Tasman East?
Yes.
June 26th for council?
For council. Yeah, we had intended to make it a joint session, and not enough commissioners could be in attendance to say that you all got the joint study session.
So you'll let us know then. Okay, great.
When was that sent?
Okay, so I got one more thing to try and get in before we're done.
It went out a couple of weeks ago or a week or something ago. Four commissioners, you were included as
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it, so.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Oh, one other, sorry, special announcement. Rosa Avalos has been supporting our planning commission. This is actually her last planning commission with us. She's going to be working in our fire department. We're really excited for her to continue to grow professionally. But it just, there is so much work that goes on behind the scenes as she's diligently training Elizabeth Elliott, who's stepping into her shoes. So just really want to acknowledge her and thank her for her contributions.
Thank you.
I would like to welcome Elizabeth to our team.
Welcome.
And Rosa, you've been so patient with all the things you had to take care of us, so thank you very much. Okay, Commissioner Salem?
Yeah, I wanted to find out if there's a way to get a procedural decision into the process of how we're going to handle time for speakers. Because if a speaker has a limited 2-minute time and a commissioner interrupts or asks a question, the clock should either stop for the speaker or have additional time added. So hopefully we can have that more formal.
I think we usually do that, don't we?
No, we haven't
the
tonight.
clock doesn't stop, but I would just say a simple suggestion might just be to hold your questions until they finish speaking.
Okay.
I would like to say that I would, in general, I mean, I'm not ready to have this conversation. We all want to leave right now. But in general, I'd like to have a conversation with the commission on just the efficiency of our meetings. And, sometimes we can take 3 hours on 2 topics, and then we can spend 3 hours on 7 topics in which no one's here. So it just, maybe a little bit more awareness for all of us on how to deliberate more quickly. And you're doing a wonderful job, Chair. But it's a collective effort on all of our parts to move it along.
Understandable.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Third.
Fifth. So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
No.
So Diana, can the chair make a motion?
No, we're not going home. We're going to be here until 2:30.